doors will remain open at 3 churches violating BC's ban on gatherings as the province loses its bid for an injunction against in-person church services. We have reaction from BC's top doctor.
The Vancouver Police Board has to ban street checks.
The Vancouver Police Board will review a report on Thursday suggesting that street checks targeting Indigenous and Black people have decreased in the last year. But despite the new data, police critics say that there's still no legal basis for street checks and they must be stopped.
I am one of the other John Horgans. I'm a professor of psychology at Georgia State University.
A case of mistaken identity. Some messages intended for BC Premier John Horgan have been going to a different man with the same name who lives in the U.S. Just ahead, the other John Horgan says it's not the first time he's been confused for the BC Premier.
There are 427 new cases of COVID-19 across the province tonight. Just over half of those cases are in the Fraser Health region, and 3 more people have died in the last day. More than 176,000 doses of the vaccine have been administered across the province.
3 Fraser Valley churches can keep their doors open and welcome congregants despite violating BC's ban on events and gatherings. The BC Supreme Court has denied the province's request for an injunction to shut down in-person church services. Last Sunday, Langley's Riverside Calvary Chapel looked to the heavens for a favorable court decision.
So we pray that for Chief Justice Hinkson, that you would move in his heart as he waits and processes all this information, and as he comes with his decision on Wednesday. We pray that you would just give favor, Lord, and you'd help him to lead in an appropriate way.
Well, those prayers were answered. On Wednesday morning, BC Supreme Court Chief Justice Christopher Hinkson denied the BC government's request for an injunction against 3 Fraser Valley churches breaking COVID-19 rules. Riverside Calvary Chapel, Emmanuel Covenant Reformed Church in Abbotsford, and Free Reformed Church in Chilliwack are holding in-person services despite BC's current ban on events and gatherings. In his ruling, Justice Hinkson says he does not condone the churches flouting public health orders and possibly spreading COVID, but he has to consider the rights of churchgoers, saying granting an injunction may deprive the petitioners of constitutional rights, amounting to irreparable harm to them. The ruling comes as these same churches prepare to take BC to court next month to try overturning the ban on church gatherings. Their lawyer compares churches to restaurants, saying if people can dine in, congregants should be allowed to sit in on sermons.
It is essential for them to sit in a house of worship for a period of time for worship, to hear a religious message, socially distanced, contact traced, all of those things. And I think just common sense, you have to ask, what is the greater risk of transmission in one setting versus the other?
In a written response to the denied injunction, Dr. Bonnie Henry says in part, based on the science and evidence, I put public health orders in place to protect faith leaders, their congregations, and the communities in which they worship. These are legal orders that apply to everyone in our province, and most churches are following them. I thank each of them. Dr. Henry says the province does not want to arrest churchgoers, it just wants to prevent them from gathering. In his ruling, Justice Hinkson questioned what the point of an injunction would be if violators wouldn't be prosecuted. In Vancouver, Travis Prasad, City News.
A new Westminster Comedy Club owner feels it's arguably safer coming to a comedy show than going to a restaurant or bar. Why he feels it's essential to allow BC to have a laugh, and his plea to Dr. Bonnie Henry. A juvenile cougar has been killed by conservation officers in Port Coquitlam. They put the animal down last night after reports 2 of the wild cats were stalking a 14-year-old in the Hyde Creek area. The second cat is believed to be the younger animal's mother. She has not been found. Conservation officers are still in the area trying to track it down.
We ask that the public still be aware of their surroundings and take safety precautions that are necessary. We ask that people with dogs keep them on a leash, even if it's just in the backyard for a few minutes. If they come across a cougar on a trail, act bold. Don't run, back away, but don't necessarily turn your back to it. Leave a escape route on either side of you if the cougar is to try and escape, and report immediately when it's safe to do so.
There have been a number of recent cougar attacks on dogs in the Tri-Cities. A terrifying surprise for a woman in Abbotsford after she found a man climbing on a ladder towards her second-floor balcony in the middle of the night. Abbotsford police say the woman woke up just before 4:30 this morning after she heard some commotion on her balcony. When she checked to see what it was, she saw the man, who quickly climbed down the ladder and ran away after he was spotted. Police say it looks like the ladder had been stolen from a nearby work vehicle, and they don't know what the man's intentions were. A 260% surge of violent shoplifting over the past year has led to the targeted arrest of 130 suspects in downtown Vancouver. Police say 45 of the people picked up by the officers over the last month already have criminal records, and some of the weapons used were guns, knives, bear spray, and needles. 268 charges have been recommended and 35 weapons have been seized. More than $37,000 worth of property stolen from stores, including London Drugs and Lululemon, has also been recovered.
There is no legal basis for the Vancouver Police Department to continue with street checks. It must end.
The Vancouver Police Board will review a report on Thursday suggesting that street checks targeting Indigenous and Black people have decreased in the last year. But police critics say it's not about how many people are stopped on the street, but rather officers shouldn't be street checking people in the first place.
The concern that we have isn't whether they are street checking 10 people or hundreds of thousands of people. The issue is that I think it sets up an imbalance of power where a person in uniform with a weapon comes up and begins to question you. And if you're the person being questioned, it doesn't feel voluntary.
Vancouver police say street checks are any voluntary interaction between a police officer and a person, which is more than a casual conversation and impedes the person's movement. Just 261 street check records were submitted in 2020. Compare that to the 4,544 records submitted in 2019. That's a decrease of 94.3%. And the VPD defines only 75 of those records as proactive street checks. Police say that drop is likely due to a January 2020 policy on street checks that prohibits officers from stopping people on the sole basis of an identifying factor, like race. But Megan McDermott with the BC Civil Liberties Association is critical of the VPD report.
If they can continue to do their work with severely limiting how they interact with people on the street and infringing on people's liberty interests and privacy interests, it kind of begs the question of why they're still so defensive about the practice and why they keep making the case for why they need this tool so badly.
The BCCLA continues to call for a ban on the practice. The police say banning street checks would hamper their ability to fulfill their oath of public office from doing proactive police work, responding to calls about suspicious behavior, executing warrants for arrests, and checking on people's well-being. And they maintain anyone who states that street checks are illegal are wrong. McDermott thinks the police are confused about their own policies.
Members of our community are being treated as suspects when there's nothing to be suspicious about. And so to see this continued confusion or the blurring of the lines between it is extremely disturbing. And if the police don't know what their rights are, where their obligations end and where our human rights begin, then I'm really troubled about what the public might make about reports like this.
In Vancouver, Keir Junos, City News.
The deadline has passed for a group of campers to pack up and move from a section of Vancouver's Strathcona Park. They had until 10 o'clock this morning to move, and a few of them are still there. Last week, the Vancouver Park Board drafted an order and posted it on fencing, notifying campers they had to relocate. A majority of tents have moved to the other side of the park. The tent city has been set up at Strathcona since the summer, since the tenters were forced out of Oppenheimer Park and then Crab Park. Victoria Police have seized a number of weapons that were found in an abandoned tent in a parking lot near Royal Athletic Park. Officers found 2 replica firearms, a wooden bat with nails and blades attached to it. Police seized the weapons and are asking anyone with information to come forward and speak with investigators. Andrew Wilkinson has formally handed in his resignation as leader of the BC Liberals. He announced his plans to step down shortly after last October's election defeat that saw the Liberals reduced to 28 seats in the BC legislature. Under the party's constitution, a new leader needs to be elected within 1 year. Interim Liberal leader Shirley Bond says she has no plans to enter the leadership race.
I decided to tweet something out to say, I am not the John Horgan you need to speak to about these issues.
Over the years, a man with the same name as BC's premier has been overwhelmed with messages about Metro Vancouver's SkyTrain expansion, pipeline projects, and other BC issues. But it's all been a case of mistaken identity.
I'm normally mistaken for your John Horgan on Twitter, and sometimes I'll have a little bit of fun with it, saying, well, these are complicated issues, and good for you for caring about your community.
A Twitter thread gained traction on social media Wednesday after John Horgan, who is a psychology professor at Georgia State University, tweeted out a message saying, "Canadian friends, those of you writing to me to complain about delays to the proposed SkyTrain project deal, I am not the John Horgan you seek."
All of the exchanges are terribly polite and good-natured, and so it's impossible to get frustrated with the mix-up.
The post prompted BC Premier John Horgan to tweet back a message saying, "I knew something was up when I was mailed all these Georgia State University psychology papers to Mark," along with a very Canadian apology saying sorry for the confusion.
I have to give him credit. It was a very, very sweet gesture and nice of him to do that.
Georgia's John Horgan says the mix-up has happened many times over the past few years.
This most latest iteration was an email I received last night from someone who shall remain nameless. And it was a heartfelt email to, I have it here in front of me now, to several politicians imploring them to consider the SkyTrain, and the senator talks about, the impact it would have for the community.
It's not the first case of mistaken identity in Canadian politics. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has been mistaken for another user by the same name on Twitter who appears to live in Virginia. And a U.S. woman by the name Erin O'Toole has also been confused for federal conservative leader Erin O'Toole on Twitter.
Tweeted back very nicely, "I think you might be thinking of someone else. This isn't me. I live in Colorado. Also, I'm a woman."
BC's premier also extended an invitation to the other John Horgan to visit BC when it's safe. As an avid hiker and climber, Georgia's John Horgan says he's traveled here before.
I think I need to go back in person and find out more about why people care so much about the SkyTrain issue. I think I owe it to BC residents for me to do that now.
In Burnaby, Miranda Fatour, City News.
A New Westminster Comedy Club owner isn't in a laughing mood as the seats in his theater remain empty, despite bars and restaurants continuing to welcome customers.
I mean, to me, it is blatantly obvious that it's safer to be in a comedy club.
Rick Bronson opened House of Comedy in New Westminster on January 1st, 2020. The unfortunate timing, he admits, feels like a bit of a joke of its own.
So much for stand-up comedy, an industry that's built on timing. Yes.
After a few months of being open, he was shut down along with the rest of the province due to COVID-19. But his complaint is, although some industries have now opened back up, he continues to see dust on the seats.
If you're sitting at a restaurant, or if you or I are out to dinner together, we're going to be conversing. We're face to face. We're not wearing masks because we're eating while drinking and talking. Whereas in a comedy club scenario, everyone is facing the same direction. They're facing the stage. No one's up moving around. It's not like they're going over to say hi to their friends at the other table, because that's not the nature of a performance.
We could all use a laugh. We can all use some joy in our life every day, but it doesn't mean we have to go to a comedy club.
BC's Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry isn't cracking up when it comes to allowing places like Benson's to reopen, addressing the idea at her briefing Tuesday.
We have seen where people think they're doing okay, and it's just a little bit of a stretch, and we're not really breaking the rules too much, that we see spread of this virus, and it gets into our communities, and it gets transmitted in workplaces, it gets transmitted in schools. We see people ending up in hospital.
Arbitrary, ambiguous decisions, that's what really eats me up. I mean, if you're going to say to the rest of our hospitality friends, restaurants, bars, you can be open, but if you're a comedy club and you have one guy with a microphone talking to you from 10 feet away, all of a sudden now it's dangerous. I just want to see the facts.
Bronson says being a new business with no 2019 financial records, they don't qualify for any of the current provincial grants. He worries about surviving the shutdown. Meanwhile, he maintains BC needs a laugh now more than ever.
And I don't think I can reiterate enough the medical benefits of laughter and how it does heal.
In New Westminster, Ashley Burr, City News. The effort to create more diversity in Canadian media just got a boost. Omni Television has announced it's handing out $60,000 in scholarships over the next 3 years to post-secondary students pursuing careers in ethnic and third language journalism. Our partners at Omni say the pandemic has shown how critical ethnic and third language media is when it comes to engaging multicultural communities with the latest news and information. Omni is owned by our parent company, Rogers. Vancouver's news is always available on the radio with News 1130 or online anytime at citynews1130.com. Your next edition of City News is tonight at 11. Thanks so much for watching and have a great night.